So I wanted to start with a little parable this morning. It's the story of a monastery, and the monastery was out, as some monasteries are, well out from any town or city, and it was a monastery that had, at various times, really flourished. It had been a place where there had been many, that had many monks, and the monastery had grown. They were doing all sorts of wonderful things. People would come from large distances to pray with the monks, to learn from them. But the monastery had fallen on hard times. The number of monks had dwindled, and it was no longer a site of pilgrimage. And this worried the abbot, the priest in charge of the monastery. And so they tried to do different things. They made sure that their liturgy was very beautiful. They tried to do all sorts of things to try and restore what had been lost, but it wasn't really working. It didn't seem to be changing much. And so the abbot decided that he would go some distance away to visit the rabbi, so the leader of the Jewish community, because this rabbi had a reputation for his wisdom and insight. He was a holy man. And so the abbot went to see him, and they broke bread together. And the rabbi poured out, the abbot poured out his heart, sharing everything that was going on with the monastery and all the things that he was worried about in relation to the community. And the rabbi sat there very quietly and listened to it all. After the abbot had poured out his heart, the rabbi just simply looked at him and said, "The Messiah is among you. The Messiah is among you." That's all he said. And the abbot went back to the monastery, and the monks gathered around. There's only a few left, and they gathered around him and they said, "Well, what did the rabbi say?" And the abbot said, "Well, he said the Messiah's amongst us." But he must have got that wrong. I mean, obviously for the Jews, they're still waiting for the Messiah. It can't be here. And then for us, we believe the Messiah's come in Jesus. So I don't understand what this means. But the monks were simple folk, and as they went about the normal life of the monastery, when they passed another monk, the thought emerged in their minds, maybe he's the Messiah. And as they served dinner, they found themselves thinking, well, maybe the one that I'm serving dinner to, maybe he's the Messiah. And they began to treat each person in the monastery like this was the Messiah, like this was the presence of God here present amongst them. And as they began to treat each other like that, all the while thinking that this was the Messiah, what started to happen was that people started to be drawn to the monastery. As they saw the way they treated one another, young men came to join the monastery. And once again, people came from far and wide to be part of and to experience the life of their community. And after a short period of time, what had been a struggling community on the edge of extinction became a flourishing community of God once more. Now, it's a little parable, right? And really, I think of it as a little riff on the gospel today, where Jesus says, "Love one another as I have loved you, and the sign, they'll know that you're my disciples in the way that you love. If you love as I have loved." This will be the sign. That's how they'll tell that you're my disciples. In other words, the key characteristic of the Christian community is love, the way that we love one another. That we do that in imitation of Jesus. The kind of love that we're called to is the love that Jesus has for us. That Jesus gives his life away. He empties himself. We think about his ministry again and again, reaching out in love to those who are hurting, suffering, those who are experiencing trial or hardship, those who are under oppression. Jesus comes with love to those. And then that culminates on the cross. When he dies on the cross, he dies out of love. He dies as the great act of self-giving so that we might be restored to relationship with God and with each other. And so he says here in the gospel today that the key criteria will be about how we love one another. And so the corollary of that, or the connection with that to our little parable this morning, is that what would it mean if we actually took that so seriously? Remember, Jesus says also in another part of the gospel, whenever you love the least of my brothers and sisters, whenever you do that to them, you do it to me. Jesus, in other words, does identify himself with us. That when we love someone else, it's Jesus that we're loving. It's an expression of our love for him to love others. As C.S. Lewis, the great novelist and scholar, and also deeply committed Christian, once said, next to the Blessed Sacrament, in the tabernacle behind me, your brother or sister is the closest and most real presence of God to you. What would it mean if we took this more seriously? What would it mean if we took it really radically? It would mean, I think, that we take more steps forward as a community, as St Declan's, in being able to really reach out to one another in love. That we wouldn't be satisfied with a nice, polite hello to those we see at church, but that we would deeply care for one another. That when conflicts happen, when little moments happen, which they always do, that's the part of the human condition, the sign would not be the absence of conflict, but the sign would be about how well we reconcile, how well we work it through, how well we talk about it. What would it be like to radically show that kind of love? What would it be like where we actually say, you know what, we actually really care about each other deeply, we know each other well, we support and encourage one another? What kind of community would that look like? Would it look like that little monastery? Because people would see the sign of love. They would see the sign of love, which is the sign of Jesus. The other part of this that's so important is that it wouldn't be that we'd be this little holy huddle, this inward focused group, that we love each other and care for one another really well, but somebody new comes and we say, oh, sorry, you can't come into this, right? Somebody walks through the door for the first time, and that may be some of us here today. It's so wonderful to have you here. Our hope and prayer is that you would receive a welcome. It can't be that we're turned inward upon ourselves, that when somebody's new to the parish, that they find that they can't find a way in, that they don't experience a sense of belonging, that they don't experience that they're part of and drawn into the love that we share for one another. The nature of loving as we have been loved is that we would have that generous love of Jesus, who always looked outwards. He had the 12 that he called, those that he really invested in, that he worked with, that he spent his time with, the ones that he taught everything to. But that never meant that he was focused upon them alone, that he was always reaching out to others, especially those who are hurt and suffering. All of this is why here at St Declan's we put such a big emphasis. We say that building a sense of community here is one of the key aspects of our vision, of what we're trying to do here. That this would be a place where people say, you know what, there's something different here because, and they may not even be able to articulate or put their finger on it exactly, but the key test, the only thing that they really should be able to, the thing that I really want them to be able to say is, look at how they love. You can have amazing worship. You can have a community that is deeply reverent and prayerful. You can have a community that does incredible things, but if love isn't the animating core of that, if love isn't at the very center of it, if the love that we have for one another isn't actually the driving, animating force of that, because we know that we have been loved by Jesus, then it's all for nothing. It's all for nothing. The worship could be extraordinary, but if it's without love, as St Paul says, I'm a cymbal clashing or a gong booming. We could do amazing things in reaching out to others, but if it's not animated by love, then we're an NGO, we're a service provider, but we're not a Christian community. What we're called to is something wonderful and beautiful. In the Catholic Church, I think a really genuine sense of Christian community often proves elusive. We haven't given it enough emphasis. We haven't said it's crucial and important enough, which is a tragedy and deeply ironic because we've got a gospel like today that says that the sign that we're followers of Jesus is how we love one another. Love is the sign that we really are Jesus's, that we really belong to him. Is that a massive challenge? Absolutely, because it's hard to love. It's challenging to love. To love as Jesus does means to love those that we find difficult to love. It means that there be people that we think, I don't have anything in common with them, but that's actually not true. It's actually not true. That if we are Jesus's, we have the greatest thing in common. We have our faith in him. That we have been united and bound together by our shared faith. And so to practice forgiveness, to practice that loving of those that we don't necessarily easily connect with, that's the gospel. One of the things I love about St Declan's is that we come from many diverse places and have made Australia home. What an extraordinary thing that is, that we be a community that has all of this richness of different cultures present here week after week. What a wonderful gift. That should be a sign of love too. That people from different cultures would love one another and they wouldn't see those differences as problems but as gifts to be celebrated. What a sign of love that is in a world where differences and tensions emerge amongst cultures so readily and so easily. This is our biggest gift. This is the greatest thing we have to offer to the world. And that's why it has to be at the core. It has to be central. It's the sign that we're Jesus's. It's the sign that we belong to him, that we're his. So as we celebrate Eucharist today, I want to invite you to think about the rabbi's gift, the gift that he gave to that monastery. That every person in the congregation today at this 9 o'clock Mass, but every person in the parish is Jesus to you, and you're to be Jesus to them. Because the Messiah is amongst us, Jesus is with us, because we are his body. But it's a body that is always and ever to be animated, shaped by, characterized by love.